What's going on, Duke fans? Talking ball. I'm Jack. It's JD, and we're back for another preview episode here. And this time, finally, we've got a big game. We've got a fun game to look ahead to. A real test for the Dukies. We're playing Kentucky Tuesday night in the Champions Classic at 9 o'clock on ESPN, and I'm really excited for this matchup. I think it's going to be a real test of where this team is truly at. We haven't had that test in the exhibition games with Lincoln, Arizona State, and then even the first two games with Maine and Army. I would argue Maine has been the biggest test so far, and this is going to be a big leap in competition with Kentucky.
No, no question. And so if you go through the Kentucky box score from yesterday, they played 4 o'clock against. Um,
Who did they play?
it was a like a Duke game. It was a powder puff game for them. But what was interesting to me is how deep they went, and after reading a very different description of what Coach Cal was going to do. He thought he was 9 players. He thought he had 3 guards. He had 3 swingmen and 3 centers. But the box score said just around 20 minutes for about 10 players, and he went to about 13 deep.
Just to be clear, they played Bucknell. And are you talking about
Right.
Coach Pope for Kentucky? Because Coach Cal is in Arkansas. Just before we had some hate comments.
Yes, that's probably a good correct. That's a good correction.
So yeah, Coach
Um,
Pope.
it's like Kentucky, Coach Cal. I mean, it's like synonymous for 12 years until he got run out of town. But you're right, it's Coach Pope, and they've said nice things about each other. But looking at the Kentucky box score, I still will say that Kentucky did average about 20 minutes. And as far as my comments with Coach Cal are concerned, they do relate to Arkansas. So everyone, please understand, this is the old guy. It's tricky trying to keep the excitement of the other team straight. You need content that is valuable to you, and I have to do better with that. And so that's why we have the young guy here to keep me straight.
Well, I try to. I think I'm accurate about 85% of the time. But those 15%, I'm glad to be corrected by our audience here. So yeah, they did play about 10 guys. I watched a decent percentage of that game, I would say. Bucknell was 2-0 coming into that game. We're a little frazzled early on, and they kind of settled into the game, and then towards the end of the game, Kentucky seemed to run away with it. One thing that is most interesting to me, looking at the 10 guys who played for Kentucky, as you rightly pointed out, it's well balanced. The thing that was most interesting to me though is 6 of the 10 guys from Kentucky. It's their 5th year in college basketball, and what does that mean? Well, it means that they started in college basketball the same time when our freshmen were freshmen in. Actually, they were in 8th grade because it's their 5th year. So they were still in middle school when these guys were starting their
Great
college
observation.
careers. And additionally, it also means that when they started in college, Malawach was just starting to play basketball. And I do think these things are important to note because, look, these are grown men that we're going to be playing against. And I think also, most importantly, it is part of the reason why it was so important that we brought in guys like Mason Gillis and Sion James, who are in their 6th and 5th years in college basketball, and just have the physicality and the presence and the experience to come into a game like this and not be rattled and be very, I mean, especially Mason Gillis, who's played in the biggest game in college basketball, and just be ready for this moment because look, this is a as I said in the beginning, a big step up in competition, And not only that, but because it's a Champions Classic, there's just a lot more that goes into this game. You're going to be waiting to warm up. You got to watch the first game. It's just a very different environment than the first, two games in the exhibition games to start the season.
Um, I stayed up last night to watch the Auburn Houston game, and that was, I think Houston's ranked about number 5, and or Auburn's like number 11, and the intensity of the both teams, because it was like 32-28 at half, but the full court press that Auburn put on from the very beginning of the game. Um, I am going to stay with my theme here of wanting to see how Foster and uh,
Proctor.
Proctor, boy, am I having trouble with names today. Okay, and Proctor had how they play against a much better team, how they play against Kentucky, how they do with guards. So maybe you can start there, Jack. What are the Kentucky guards like?
Yeah, great segue. So they play 10 guys. So they have a different feel with their starters versus when they go to the bench. And it's clear to me that Coach Pope values defense with his starting lineup. When you look at Lamont Butler, Defensive Player of the Year in the Mountain West from San Diego State, and multiple time All Defensive Player. He is a guard who will play full court. He'll pick you up full court. He's a really good defensive guard. And then Otega Owe is not far behind. He's a little bit more of a dynamic offensive player, getting downhill, attacking the basket, but he's a really good defender in his own right. The one thing important to note with both of them is they're not the best three-point shooters. Owe has gotten off to a decent start to start the year, but he didn't shoot them at a high volume last year, so I don't expect that to continue. Now, coming off the bench, they do play Kerr Kriisa and Kobe Brea. And those guys are much more dynamic offensive players. Kriisa is a really good passer. When he comes into the game, the ball moves. Think like Alonzo Ball, not the same player. Please don't kill me in the comments. Not the same player, but I just mean like that kind of impact in terms of he comes into the game, all of a sudden everyone's making that extra pass to find the open player. And Kobe Brea is a guy who Duke fans should be at least a little bit familiar with because there was interest from Duke when he was in the transfer portal this summer. He was the best three-point shooter in college basketball last year. Arguably, I guess, I would say Reed Sheppard was right up there with him. He shot 49% from three on 6 attempts per game last year. And this year, he's shooting like 68% in the 2 games he's played. It's been unbelievable. And he is 6'7". And when you have him and Jackson Robinson, who are both 6'7" swing men who can create their own shot, especially Robinson, who can score from the mid-range and from 3, they present problems for the opposition.
So before I go into any analysis on the game, I still want to defend my lapse with regard to Kentucky. It's been since 2011 that we have had the Champions Classic, and Coach Cal has been at Kentucky almost all those years. I think it's 11 years that he was at Kentucky. And so immediately I hear Kentucky and I'm thinking Coach Cal. To make it worse, there was a long article yesterday in the New York Times all about Coach Cal and the change from Kentucky to Arkansas and what he was doing. And so I was so focused on that. But the other coaches, certainly from Michigan State, from Kansas, remain the same. So it'll be Coach Pope's first time at the Champions Classic. And that could be interesting in the fact that he's not used to this atmosphere.
Right. And while this will be Coach Hire's third time as the head coach, he's been the assistant coach in this atmosphere for a number of years. He didn't play I think if you're right, which might be a big if, but I think you're right. 20, you seem very confident in 2011. He had,
2011 at Madison MSG at Madison Square Garden was the first one.
may have gone to that, or we went to 2014. I think whatever.
In Chicago.
Anyways, yeah, we went to that one for sure. That was a cold one. Um, but yeah,
It
that's a
was
good
hard
point.
getting home too.
Yeah, it was. We did see Jay Billis though. Shout out to Duke legend Jay Billis. But with that being said, I also, we talked about the guards. Let's talk about the bigs really quickly for Kentucky. They do start a pair or almost two 7-footers in Andrew Carr, who Duke fans should be familiar with from Wake Forest, who is on his third team. By the way, Jackson Robinson on his fourth team. There's a few people who are on their third team for Kentucky, at least their third team. And Amari Williams. So they start 6'11", Andrew Carr, and then 7-foot Amari Williams, who is the defensive player of the year at Drexel. Really good defensive big man. And then they bring off the bench Ainsley Almanor, who is a senior from Farley Dickinson. Shoots the three really well. Pretty big, 6'7", about 245. And Brandon Garrison, who's a sophomore, 6'10", 250 is their backup center. So, like how we play Malawach, and then Malik Brown comes in. Kind of similar, but I think Mari Williams gets a little bit more of the bulk of the minutes. And lastly, this one's just kind of fun for me. The one freshman who plays for Kentucky is Colin Chandler, who originally committed to Coach Pope when he was the coach at BYU, then went on a 2-year mission, as they do out in Utah, and then joined Coach Pope now in Kentucky. And what's funny to me is that he's the one freshman who's part of the rotation, and he's 21. So this is a very experienced team that Kentucky is putting out there on Tuesday night.
Well, so that the team itself clearly has experience, but the coach as head coach of Kentucky does not. And I don't know how much that will be a factor, but it is something to look at because as you have to fine tune, and for both teams, it's the first time they're going to go up against quality opponents. Coaching may matter in this game. And I certainly would have to give the edge to Coach Shire. And shout out to my favorite assistant coach, Jay. And I think that Jay is just can provide. I mean, for years now, you've been able to go. Here's the list of the assistant coaches on the team, and they all have a pedigree usually of playing for Duke in the past, and they all bring something to that. And it's not entirely clear, certainly this early in the season, whether or not Kentucky will. They're in transition, and not to go back to Coach Cal anymore, but he brought some of the players that he had recruited with him to Arkansas. And so Coach Pope had to put this team together. And so while I would naturally give the edge to Duke in this game, not just the rankings really don't mean very much right now in the year, as you're about to say with regard to number one Kansas, as you have a strong feeling that they are not the number one team in the country. It's going to be interesting with Kentucky and Duke. Where are they? What are they? But it's their first quality matchup.
Yeah, and I'll save my bigger talk about Kansas for when we play Kansas. All I'll say is I would definitely take Alabama over Kansas for now. With that being said, though, I do think continuity is a big factor in this game. Kentucky, this is a brand new roster. There is nobody on this team who got minutes for Kentucky last season. And so, and for Duke, there's only two guys who played together last year, right? Proctor and Foster. And so I think that's going to be something to watch in this game. the continuity aspect of, how do how do you do how do you do when the
How do you
game
do?
gets a little
How do you
yeah
do?
how do you do when the game gets a little bit tighter? You're under more pressure. The score is close, but the big question for me, coming into this one specifically, is how will Duke manage when Cooper Flag has to sit out for 5 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever ends up being, with cramps? Because we've seen it now in both the first two games, and this is what happened with Paolo Banchero early on in his Duke career, and he missed time in the Champions Classic, and then he missed some time against Gonzaga. And so that's a big question for me coming into this game is how will Duke manage? Because as much as I hope that won't be a problem, and I certainly hope it isn't, it's only been a couple of days now since the Army game, and I'm not sure that they're going to be able to get that all sorted out before this matchup with Kentucky.
Jose's a hell of a trainer. I'm going to hope that he has some magic for the cramps. So that's a good thing to watch for. I'm going to stay right with my thing, the guard play for Duke. Look, if you and I are seeing that potentially could be uh, a problem and therefore apply pressure to the guards, the coach of Kentucky, Pope, can clearly say, we're going to do this. And maybe that's one of the things he comes out with. He comes out with a full court press to try to say, let's see if we can rattle them a little bit because they're a young team.
And he can do that with his starters. But when he likes to have a well balanced rotation, and the guys who come in off the bench, particularly the guards, are not nearly the defenders that the starters are. And so, like you mentioned the Auburn game, like those guys could do it the full 40 minutes. Very different. I don't see Kentucky being able to do it for 40 minutes. And I think, I think Kentucky is a little bit under ranked, might be the right word, maybe underrated, depending on how you want to look at it. I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised by how our guards perform in this matchup with Kentucky. And the only question for me in terms of how we respond is going to be, I guess, two questions. Two questions. I apologize. One, can we defend the 3-point line? Because this Kentucky team really likes to shoot the three, in particular with Kobe Brea and Jackson Robinson and Kirk Kriisa. Those guys really can shoot the ball. And secondly, can Malawach stay out of foul trouble? Because they are going to try to play, especially with Amari Williams and Andrew Carr, through the post. And those guys are a lot older. They're a little bit stronger. And if Malawach is in foul trouble, there is a little bit of a concern with Malik Brown in this particular matchup because he is going to be giving up several inches and 25 pounds. And we have not seen Patrick Gangba this year, and I think this would be a really tough game for him to start playing in. And so that is the one area where I think it's going to be really important for Malawach to stay out of foul trouble in this matchup.
I also think that this is a good game in which if they don't get early productivity from the starting five, which is pretty clear at this point, that the portal players, Gillis,
James,
the other two,
Brown,
James, Brown, so that they can. I am hoping they're the stopgap. They are, yes, the teams that we play against. We hope we don't run into this same pattern, but this is the first test. So let's watch for it and see what happens. They do have an immediate stopgap, and they do have three players that they can put in there that I think can hold the line. And then you can rotate back in the starters and be able to see better offense, certainly from, Coop and K2.
And speaking of K2, last game you had some remarks about him not being his best game, even though he did lead us in scoring. And I think this game in particular, he's got to get 15 shots. And we've got to do a good job of getting him open. And the one guy who quietly does a really good job at getting Con Knipple open threes is Malik Brown, who is a tremendous off-ball screener. That I don't know how many times I've gone back and watched. There's probably about 3 or 4 of Knipple's threes this year where he's gotten open because of a Malik Brown screen. And I think that's something to watch out for because they're going to have to run him around. He's going to be doing those loops around the baseline, and can we find him and get him open for 3? And then also, I think importantly, it's going to be, if we start out shooting like we did against Army, it's going to be a tough game, where we were 1 for 11 from 3. So I think Proctor and Foster hitting some early shots is going to be important because, look, those guys are the leaders of this team, and this is the first big test of the season. And so if they can set the tone early, it doesn't mean they got to go score 20 points apiece. It just means they get timely early buckets or early assists and just get the game off to the right foot. And that's something that both of them have talked about, and this is going to be the first opportunity for them to prove it. And honestly, to kind of prove both of us wrong about the way that they've played early on. More so Foster than Proctor.
So you corrected me last time when I said that they took an incredible amount of three-point shots, and you said that is the NBA game. So how many threes do you think they'll attempt, and what is then a good percentage to hit from three-point, and is that something we should look for?
I do, especially because Kentucky really likes to shoot threes. And, it's a math problem, really, at the end of the day. If you listen to Coach Missoula, he's turned out to be one of the better coaches in basketball for the Celtics. It's the one thing he consistently harps on, and it's why the Celtics have been so good. They shoot a ton of threes. It's part of their offensive DNA. And then on the flip side, they try to limit their opponent's threes. And if you can do that, the math is in your favor. And so I wouldn't necessarily say there's a specific number, although if I were to give you a number, it would be 30. That would be the number I'd look for.
Okay.
And I would hope they
shoot. And then the percentage?
I would hope they shoot 36% or better. If you're going to shoot better than that, it's a good shooting night, and it should give us a chance to win the game. And on the flip side, we want to prevent Kentucky from shooting a high percentage from 3. And if they end up shooting a lot of them, but they're contested, so be it. I think that's going to be the key to the game for us on the defensive end of the court is can we either prevent them from shooting threes or make them shoot contested threes? Because one thing with Jackson Robinson in particular is he is willing to take tough shots, and sometimes he does make them. He is a tough shot maker, but if you can force him into a game of doing that, I think it will favor Duke more so than Kentucky.
So it sounds like you're saying roughly 13 of our baskets should come from three-point range, roughly accounting for 40 points is what we should do. So if we shoot a low percentage, it's going to hurt. And if we don't attempt enough, that may hurt. And so I'm definitely going to be looking for how many do we put up there. I think you're right that the college game is adjusting to the pro game, so why not keep shooting three-pointers? And so I'm going to look at what you're just clarifying with regard to the number of attempts, the percentage hit, and let's see if Duke can do it.
Yeah, and quickly, Coach Pope coming over from BYU, it was something he was known for in having a free-flowing offense that allowed his guys to get up a number of threes, and that has not changed as he's moved to Kentucky. And that's why I think it's imperative that the three-point battle is going to be, a really important factor in this game with Kentucky because they're going to shoot them. They are going to shoot them. It's just can we contest them and make them difficult. So with that being said, We look forward to seeing you guys after the game. I guess it'll be around 11 o'clock Eastern time. We'll still be awake.
You want to watch us in the morning? We understand.
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. But we'll be there just after the game, like we always are. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment below, and share this with a friend. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.